Doug, thank you so much for joining us here at IMpower.
Thank you.
It's great to see you. You're looking to focus on green bonds, and how would you say the issuer pool has grown over the past decade there, and what continues to draw issuers into that space at the moment?
Yeah, so the market has expanded a lot since 2014. It's now 1.7 trillion euros in size, and we continue to see new issuers as well as repeat issuers come back to the market as well. What's really been driving it is a combination of government-related issuance, with the EU, for example, issuing 50 billion euros of green bonds a year, which is a huge amount. But that corporate issuers are really keeping pace with that. And it's not just the financials and utilities who really drove the early growth of the market. We now see a lot of industrial companies, including chemical companies, particularly automotive companies, really using that market to finance the transition towards net zero.
So who is it that's investing in green bonds, and what makes it such an attractive opportunity for them?
Yeah, so I think originally it was very much institutional investors, so insurance companies, pension funds that were looking to have a fixed income allocation that also had an environmental impact. Now we see retail investors really coming into the asset class as well. And that's partly a mindset change for retail investors who want to have an impact with their investments. They're not prepared to sacrifice returns. And I think that's the benefit of the green bond market, is your risk return characteristics are very similar to traditional fixed income allocation. You're not paying any more, same credit risk, but you get all this positive environmental impact. So I think it's an asset class that's more interesting across the investor spectrum.
So what are the key points for those investors to keep in mind when they're considering sort of adding green bonds into sort of fixed income portfolios, or indeed increasing their allocation there?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things you need to be aware of. I think the first is that unfortunately not every bond that's called green is actually green. We end up screening out 36% of all globally labelled green bonds as not meeting our criteria. So I think having the ability to look at the bond, to look at the issuer and make your own determination of is it green, because the label itself doesn't necessarily convey a guarantee. I think the other thing to be aware of is, and this is pretty much important in the current economic cycle, is that the aggregate green bond benchmark did have a year's longer duration. That did cause some challenges in terms of placement in portfolios. Where we are with inflation and interest rates, that's actually a benefit just now. So this is definitely an asset class to look at as well. And the final point I would make is that you do need to be aware of some of the sector composition differences. So that heavy focus on financials and utilities is something you need to be aware of as an investor in terms of placement in your portfolio.
So those are the portfolios. Looking at regions, Europe's kind of led the way in this area. Now are you starting to see other regions, countries not taking their place, but coming into?
Yeah, so I think it was very much a European focused market in the early years. We still see around 60% of all global green bonds that are outstanding are still in euro currency. But it is a global market, so even in those euro currency denominated bonds, you have the likes of Apple and Verizon in the US, who originally issued green bonds in euro, now issue in dollar. And for me, that's really been the story of the last 18 months, is the growth of US dollar denominated green bond issuance. So despite what is quite a politicized debate around ESG, we do see a lot of demand on the issuer side to issue green bonds, and in the investor side as well. So we expect that to continue. We also expect to see other markets embrace green bonds in the same way that Europe and now the US has as well. So Asia, in particular, we think will be a big participant in green bond issuance going forward.
So with that growth in those new regions, do you expect that evolution to continue, and how will things like regulation and public policy impact on that?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, we do expect it to continue. I think regulation is probably the biggest topic that we're focused on in these markets at the moment. So some regulation is good. The standardization of definitions, the standardization of what is green and what is social, that's good for all market participants, and we've really relied on voluntary market development so far. So some regulation is good. I think the biggest risk that we see is different definitions in different jurisdictions. So as a global investor and as a global market, that will be a potential barrier to the continued growth. So what we'd like to see is regulators work together and have harmonized regulation as much as we possibly can, because that really does aid the market and not provide a potential barrier to issuers or investors.
You'd like to see a lot more global approach, basically.
Yeah, but I think I'm not alone. I think a lot of investors in general would like to see a more global approach. Unfortunately, I think where we are is that's less likely to happen, but let's hope that things are positive.
So given everything you've said there, what do you think you'll be focused on in particular in the next 12 months, just finally?
Yeah, so in the next 12 months, it's really focusing on social. So that is a market that's much younger in its development than green. So we don't have the same market practices and standards and definitions. We want to be an active participant in the development of that. We also want to help share data with issuers because there's just not the same availability of independent data to assess whether something is having a social impact or not. It is a harder area. So that's really where we want to focus on over the next 12 to 24 months is helping the social bond market grow in the same way that we've seen the green bond market grow.
Sounds like a very interesting time ahead, Doug. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.